Hi again, everyone. I am Raven Sinclair, and today I'm here with the Reverend Dr. Matthew Fox talking about his latest book, Julian of Norwich, Wisdom in a Time of Pandemic and Beyond. Fabulous book. Matthew is an Episcopal priest and an activist for gender justice and eco-justice. He's written 38 books translated into other languages. He holds a doctorate in the history and theology of spirituality from the Catholic University of Paris. And Matthew's received the Abbey Courage of Conscience Peace Award that puts him alongside the likes of the Dalai Lama, Rosa Parks, and Mother Teresa. Matthew, it's lovely to be with you today.
Thank you, Raven. Good to be with you.
Matthew, your beliefs are aligned with creation spirituality rather than the religion of fall redemption. Can you explain that to those that may not know what that is?
Well, grace spirituality begins with the universe, begins with creation, begins with nature. And in fact, it's the oldest tradition in the Bible, the J source in Genesis. And of course, Genesis 1 is all about cosmology, isn't it? It begins with the darkness and then light, let there be light, and then sun and moon and plants and animals, and humans come at the very end. But throughout that telling, the word good keeps coming up. Everything that comes along is called good, good, good. And then at the end, when it's all together and humans on board, it's actually called very good. So grace spirituality is about original blessing. Blessing is the theological word for goodness instead of original sin. And as you say, if you start with original sin, then your whole religious ideology is about, well, fear and damnation. And it's downhill from there. But if you begin with creation, I mean, and now let's look at today's creation story, 13.8 billion years before humans came along. All of it is a blessing. Otherwise, we couldn't be here. And I presume we're glad to be here. Of course, you can't presume that under patriarchy. Adrian Rich says, the patriarchy brings fatalistic self-hatred with it. There's a lot of that floating around. It's quite popular, actually.
So true.
So anyway, this tradition is old. It's a tradition of Jesus himself because he's from the wisdom tradition of Israel. And the wisdom tradition is about finding God in nature. And in the Middle Ages, it really exploded with Hildegard of Bingen and Francis of Assisi and Thomas Aquinas and Matilda Magdeburg and Meister Eckhart and then Julian of Norwich. And she's amazing because she's the only one among all those creation-centered mystics who lived through a pandemic. And it's sometimes hard to hold on to the goodness and the beauty of creation, of our own existence also, when life is really difficult and when you're surrounded by death. And in her day, 14th century bubonic plague, worst pandemic ever in Europe, between 40 and 50% of the people died through the plague. So 1 out of 2 people. And of course, they didn't have science like we have today. Didn't have promises of vaccine. And a lot of people freaked out. For example, a lot of men developed these clubs called flagellating clubs, where they'd go because they said, well, it must be our sins that is bringing about this plague. And so they went from village to village beating themselves and thinking that was going to solve the pandemic. It was so popular that the Pope had to intervene and say, no, cool it, this isn't going to solve the problem. So, but there's none of that in Julian. That's what's so amazing about Julian, that she has a path of how to handle yourself during a pandemic. I'm sure we'll be talking about that.
We will, yeah. Let me, yes, I want to talk. I just am enamored with Julian after reading your book. But I wanted to backtrack a bit. I had the pleasure of talking with Carolyn Mace a few weeks ago, and she believes that, as many of us do, that we are moving out of the era of religions and into a relationship with the laws of the universe. So this is aligned with you, I'm assuming. What are your thoughts about that belief? And have you always seen creation spirituality as your truth, or is it something that you evolved into?
Well, I grew up in Wisconsin, and nature was very, vivid to me there. We had 4 very strong seasons. This was before climate change hit. And you're close to the land, though I lived in a city, but a modest size one, Madison, Wisconsin. And the Native American spirit is very much in the land still. I had a lot of Native American dreams, for example, when I was young. And my family was, there were 7 kids, and you know, we were very into sports and into nature and into the seasons and all the rest. So yeah, I grew up very much in a creation-centered context. And but we were also churchgoers. We were raised Roman Catholic. I remember I always preferred Saturday Mass to Sunday Mass because Saturday was always dedicated to Mary, which is the goddess. And so these wonderful texts from the wisdom scriptures, such as Proverbs saying, I was God by God's side, playing with God day after day before the creation of the world, and delighting to be with the sons and daughters of the human race. All this joy and all this sense of cosmology. The book of Sirach that says, I, meaning wisdom, the feminine, walked on the vaults of the sky and on the sands of the deep. Just marvelous cosmic imagery. And it just moved me as a teenager, especially. I didn't have words for it, but it was mystical and it was feminine. And it was creation-centered, therefore. It wasn't about sin and things that humans do alone, though it was about creativity and art. But so I was raised in that context. Now, when I studied to be a Dominican, this other tradition kind of was in there. I could feel it, about the distrust of the body and the dualism and all this. And so I asked to go on to study spirituality because I said back in the early 60s, what you kind of quote Carol and Lisa saying, I told my superiors, my generation is going to be less interested in religion, more interested in spirituality, which is to say experience. And so I want to go on and study that more. And so that's how I got to Paris, although it was actually Thomas Merton, the Catholic monk, who said, go to Paris. I asked him where to go to study spirituality. He said, go to Paris. So I was blessed by that. And it was there that I met my mentor, 75-year-old Dominican scholar, a historian, Father Chanou, who named the tradition, the 2 traditions, the fall redemption, which was dominant, and the creation spirituality dimension. But that's again where Julian comes in, because Thomas Berry, the great geologian and prophet of ecology, says that the Black Death in the 14th century killed creation spirituality pretty much, because fear took over, not with Julian, but with most of the other people. And so the rest of religion, really, since the 14th century, has been about redemption, because there's all this fear about this life, fear about death, fear about the next life. And that's not creation spirituality. Creation spirituality is built on the mystical union of us and nature, and how the divine is in nature. Theophanies happen so much in nature. And of course, one of the culminations of this redemption-oriented religion has been the ignoring of nature. Therefore, we have the eco-crisis we have today. We have what I call matricide, the killing of Mother Earth and the killing of the mother principle. And again, this is where Julian really steps into the fray and offers us an alternative.
Well, let's talk about that, Matthew, because your book is laid out in 7 lessons that Julian shares. These chapters are lessons for, and I'm doing little air quotes, enduring, undergoing, and learning from the coronavirus. Tell us a little bit more, whatever comes up for you, to share about Julian of Norwich and how you came to write this book.
Well, I've been teaching Julian for over 40 years, and I'd helped publish a shorter book on it called The Meditations with Julian of Norwich. Came out in 1983, the same year as my book, Original Blessing. But I haven't had really the time to go more deeply into, I've written articles and I taught, but this was an occasion I just felt, because of the pandemic today, that Julian surely had something to say, because the bubonic plague hit when she was 7 years old.
Mm.
And then it kept coming back in waves, and she lived into her 80s. So clearly she lived through all this death and everything. And she had these visions at the age of 30. And they began with a vision of Christ crucified. But she makes real clear there that this stands for all of humanity's sufferings. It's really a very Buddhist notion that all beings suffer. And so that was how her visions began. But then she moves on to 16 other visions. And she wrote a short book about it shortly afterwards, again in her 30s. And then she kept kind of editing that book her entire life, because it was like a great dream for her. You know, a good dream has many layers to it. And you often, get around to the deeper layers later in your life. That's exactly what she did with her visions. And so it is remarkable. And she is the first English woman, first woman writing in English. So that alone is really stunning. And that she had the confidence and the courage to spend her whole time writing one book. And it didn't get published for 300 years, which is quite a long time to wait for your first review. And first of all, because she was a woman, but secondly, because she was this creation-centered mystic. And by then, religion had been totally distorted. That's the word I'll use, distorted by this fear-based, redemption-based, exclusively based, living creation out of it. Even the Protestant Reformation, there's no battle between Protestants and Catholics about creation. They're not going to be talking about it. It's all about sin and redemption and works and grace and indulgences. And so, religions just became smaller and smaller. Then in the year 1600, the 17th century, the church burned Giordano Bruno at the stake. And who was he? Well, he was a Dominican like I was, and like Aquinas was, and like Eckhart was, who also tried to bring science and spirituality together. He was pushing Copernicus at that time, and this freaked out the Inquisition. So they cut his tongue out, tortured him, and burned him at the stake in Rome. And needless to say, this kind of put a stop on religion and spirit and science dialogue. And I think a truce was arranged. Science said, well, you believers are kind of scary. So why don't you take the soul and we'll take the universe? And many of the Christians had been set up by Augustine's, who, by the way, invented the term original sin, at the time that the Christianity inherited an empire. And he also put down nature very much. All nature is fallen and so forth. So in effect, he was saying that nature isn't important spiritually. And so they went that way. And what happened since is that science, of course, uncovered the powers of the universe, such as atomic and nuclear power, but had very little conscience, selling its soul to Pentagon and chemistry companies and the rest. Meanwhile, religion became more and more introspective and internalized and silly, really silly. Its dominant issue was about sex. I mean, look at the Catholic Church today. And they do a bad job of it. But they miss out on the cosmos. I mean, it's really beyond belief. And it's one of the main reasons we have an ecological crisis, is that our religions have been anthropocentric. And as Pope Francis calls it, rightly, narcissistic. Because when you begin with a human, you're narcissistic. You're leaving out 13.8 billion years of unfolding of creation that brought us here. And so where's the gratitude in that? And so that's where we're at. And I think that Carolyn is right, that we're reaching out now to the mystery of the universe. And I say there are more scientists who are mystics today than bishops. And that's an easy thing to prove. Because scientists are rediscovering, if you will, the mysterious depths and a marvelous, awesome size of the universe and the history of it and the wonders of creation, how it works, evolution and the rest. And all this should be feeding our souls for the awe, the delight, and therefore the via positiva of the mystics. And that Julian talks so much about, the real healing in a time of pandemic is, first of all, as Julian teaches, to pay attention to the suffering, not flee from it, not go into denial. Here in America, 50% of our population and one entire political party is in formal denial of climate change. What? It's really unbelievable. Meister Eckhart says, God is the denial of denial. So if we're in denial, God's out the window, gone, because truth is out the window. And people are in denial about coronavirus and wearing masks. I mean, it's been politicized, which is another way of saying denial is selling very well. But anyway, Julian's first point is to pay attention to suffering. That's why the suffering Christ was the beginning of her deep meditations. But then the next chapter and her next teaching is pay attention to the goodness and the joy and the awe of life. She says that humans have a birthright of joy, a birthright of joy. Boy, that's not Calvin, that's not Luther, that kind of talk. What? It's a whole new religion. And goodness is really her focus. I say she has a metaphysics of goodness. She says, God is the goodness in things. She says, God is the goodness in nature. And nature and God are one. So she's just thoroughly in this tradition of these other people I've mentioned. But again, she's doing it during a pandemic, which is is harder to do, to remind people of the goodness of nature than it is in healthier, happier times.
Well, wow, you don't pull any punches, Matthew. I appreciate that. In chapter 5, Tasting Non-Dualism, you begin with a quote by Julian: "Between God and our soul, there is no between." It seems
wonderful?
like, this concept of the concept of unity, everything that is, it seems like is in that one sentence.
Exactly.
Can you take us into non-duality? You've already spoken about the diverging paths of science and religion and the problems that's caused. That's just a little microcosm of the macrocosm, I guess. But tell us about non-duality from your perspective.
Well, this is so important to Julian. And that is the non-duality, because she's attacking duality all the time. And those who are trying to separate nature from humanity and nature from God and nature from grace. And she says grace, grace and nature go together and so forth. So, and she invented the word oneing, O-N-E-I-N-G. It's a beautiful word for what the mystical experience is, the unio mystica, the mystical union. Now, there are other words, it's an impossible experience to name. By definition, as William James says, mysticism is ineffable, but the mystics try. And so she invented the word wanting, but like Eckhart invented the word breakthrough, Durchbruch in German, his language, for that same experience. And Thomas Aquinas uses the word ecstasy, which I often use also. And in the East, they call it satori. But in any case, this wanting, and of course, in the Jewish tradition, it's the Shema prayer, and also in the Muslim tradition, this experience of the wanting of God. All things are one. All things are one with God. And also, panentheism is another way of talking about it. Panentheism says God is in all things, and all things are in God. And Julian is absolutely explicit about that, about being a panentheist. She says her definition of faith is this: faith is trust that all things are in God, and God whom we do not see is in all things. That's her very definition of faith, is panentheism. So panentheism is another expression of this wanting, this union. And as she says, and you quote her, it's such a one, I just love that sentence: between God and the human, there is no between. And Aquinas before her, about 75 years before her, said that God is closer to us than we are to ourselves. So he too was stressing the intimacy of the divine. But the divine is also beyond us, you might say. So the divinity has both this immanent dimension, which the mystics love to emphasize, and the transcendent. And it goes together. And then we too, as as we grow our souls, like Master Arca says, God is delighted to watch our souls enlarge. As we grow our souls, we extend too into faraway places. And even today, for example, I mean, we've sent Voyager 1 outside of our solar system. So we're outside our solar system because we paid for Voyager 1, and some of us, made it happen. Scientists made it happen. And we get pictures back from Voyager 1. So we're out there. We're beyond the solar, this particular galaxy. And of course, we're now at the edge of the universe trying to figure out what's there. And we're now backing up and taking in the sound of the original fireball 13.8 billion years ago. So, I mean, the human soul is truly vast. And that is part of the picture too. The psyche, the human psyche and the universe are made for each other. Aquinas said that. He said the great thing about the human person is that we are capable of the universe. And Julian has that sense too. She often talks about the cosmic Christ treaty, about how, for example, when Christ died on the cross, she said, she doesn't say it's some personal thing. She says that all of nature suffered, because wherever there's injustice, nature suffers. We all suffer, all beings suffer. So it's a beautiful teaching, and the cosmic Christ archetype is a way of talking about the sacredness of the whole, as you said, the macrocosm. But we live in what's really something like a hologram. The microcosm that we are, and the macrocosm becomes a three-dimensional being in itself. And that reality is on the cover of the book, because the artist here in the original paintings behind me memorializes this vision that Julian had, where she saw, I love it, it's on page 40. It's just beautiful how she names it. But she saw this round ball in her hand, she says, the size of a hazelnut. And he says, with the eye of my understanding, I asked myself, what is this thing? And I was answered, it is everything that is created. I wondered how it could survive, since it seemed so little. It could suddenly disintegrate into nothing. The answer came. It endures and never will endure, because God loves it. And so everything has being because of God's love. The beautiful image. Joanna Macy just wrote me, she got the book and said, if that's not an example of a holographic experience, I don't know what is, she said. So anyway, so that's an example. Julian is steeped in today's science of what Carolyn Meese is saying, that good science matches and contributes to good spirituality. Thomas Aquinas said a mistake about creation is also a mistake about God. So then that would mean, I think, an insight about creation results in an insight about God. And so religion and science, spirituality and science should not be at each other's throats. Rather, we should be learning from each other. But as David Bohm, the physicist, says, he says, science is not enough. And Einstein says the same thing. That science has its job to do, and especially around facts. But life is more than facts. It's got myths, it's got stories to tell, it's got purpose and meaning. And that's not science's job, that's spirituality's job. To call us back to compassion, for example. Science can help there.
So wonderfully put. And I'd love to go down the rabbit hole of the holographic universe on another conversation, if you'll agree to come back and talk about that, because that's something that fascinates me. Let's bring this down a little bit into this 3D mess that we have going in, and understanding that everything's a reflection of everything else. But Julian, even on the cover, I love this. In her book, it says, God is our mother. Julian is a champion of the return of the divine feminine, as are you, Matthew. And you say in the book, this is a quote, if we are to survive as a species, we cannot ignore this imbalance. Some of us have been working to correct this imbalance for decades, some for centuries. How do you explain right now this backlash, those who are fighting so vehemently against the feminine, against female leaders, against Mother Earth, against even female sensibilities that are inherent in both men and women, like interconnectedness, responsiveness, understanding? There's such a war against it all. So why is this happening to such a magnitude or so strongly right now, and to what end?
Oh, that's a really important question. And I think what we're experiencing is the ungraceful dying of patriarchy. It's not going down without a fight.
Death throes, yeah.
Its big tail, like a dinosaur tail, thrashing around, trying to knock over everything else as it goes down. Now, not unlike Mr. President as he leaves office, or not. This is how patriarchy is. You see, I think patriarchy it runs on the reptilian brain primarily. And the reptilian brain, of course, is old, 420 million years in all of us. And it's a win-lose brain. You win-lose with the crocodile. There's no compromise. There's no mediation. And I think it's just very clear. I mean, Carl Jung said in the age of Aquarius, which we're now in, that evil will no longer be under the table. It'll be on top of the table. We can all see it. But he says, will we have the political will and I would say the love of truth to face it? Because these are hard things when a patriarchy is learning that it is responsible for the destruction of the planet as is happening in all its forms, in the form of capitalism, extractive capitalism, and even consumer capitalism and so forth. So all that has to change if we're going to survive. And the love, I had a dream years ago, and the dream said, your mother is dying. And my mother wasn't dying, my literal mother. But of course, I realized, Earth Mother is dying, Mother Earth. The Mother Principle is dying. Creativity is dying. What schools are teaching creativity? Wisdom is dying. Knowledge has taken over academia entirely. We have knowledge factories everywhere, but no wisdom schools. And wisdom is feminine in the Bible and all around the world. Kuan Yin, right over here on my table, is wisdom in the Buddhist tradition. So, and then of course, Aboriginal mother love. The indigenous people represent Aboriginal mother love. That's one of the phrases that a scholar of Native Americans has talked about. All that's, dying, but the dream didn't say it's dead. It said it's dying. So we have to wake up, and we need not only the affirmation of the divine feminine, including the motherhood of God that Julian develops at great depth, but also we need the cleaning up of the masculine. The masculine has gone crazy. That's my one short answer to what you asked. The masculine is over the top. And we're spending $58,000 a second as a species on war today, war and preparation for war, the military. Imagine what you could do with that money around education, around science, around healthcare. I mean, all the basics of life we could be attending to, and around healing the earth. And instead, we're putting it all in these fantasies about how we can kill each other more fully and more perfectly, and how many nuclear weapons do we need, etc. So that's patriarchy, completely out of control. And this is where Julian is so radical, but in her subtle way. She literally deconstructs dualism, and in so doing, deconstructs patriarchy. Because Rosemary Ruther, the great feminist theologian, says that the foundation of patriarchy is dualism. And feminism, she says, is non-dualism. So that battle between dualism and non-dualism is being played out. And you can look at the tragedies, indeed the traumas of our civilization, slavery, and of course what came afterwards, which was a covered up slavery kind of thing. And we have Black Lives Matter reminding us of that today. the Me Too movement is reminding us of rape and the oppression of women and girls. And of course, the selling of girls still a big business around the world. And of course, the abuse of boys as well, and the pedophile scandal in religion, and the cover up of it, which is even worse, in religion. And so all these, and then of course the climate change, the coronavirus, which is a child of climate change. The cause of climate change is, the cause of coronavirus is climate change. So all of these, I think, tell us that patriarchy is ruling and has been for thousands of years, and it's out of control. And I think that Donald Trump epitomizes it. He's like an archetype of it all. He's like the perfect capitalist who cares about nothing but his own wallet. And so we're living in these amazing times. But like Julian, we have to keep our center. We have to stay grounded. And that's where she has so much to teach us about what to pay attention to, and not to get too overwhelmed by the pain and the suffering all around us. You know, Mirabai Starr, who translated Julian's book in fine translation, she and I are teaching a course on Julian these days with Shift Network. She says that she believes that Julian herself was a mother who lost a child in the Black Death, and her husband. Wow. And now Mirabai herself lost a child as a young mother. So she knows that. I think she has very strong intuition about the suffering that Julian is referring to. But Julian does not dwell just on the suffering. She says we should be dwelling on the goodness, dwelling on the joy, dwelling on awe, but also on service, as the mother does. And this is how she reconstructs teaching about God, that God as mother, God the creator is mother, God the son, the liberator, is mother. She calls Christ mother, has the whole development of Christ as mother, and the Holy Spirit is mother. And of course, in Judaism, spirit, the word for spirit, ruah, is feminine. So all that is her way of, so she deconstructs patriarchy because she's deconstructing dualism between us and God, between God and nature, and between nature and grace. But also she offers this motherhood of God thing. And then she's done this thing, this great effort to stand up to matricide, to the killing of the mother. And that's behind all patriarchy.
I'd like to insert something because, you know, I teach Hermetic wisdom, and the principle of gender is, I think it's important as a mother of, I have two sons who are adults now. This has less to do, it doesn't have to do with male and female sex necessarily. This is a generating principle. And so this is not a war on, you know, young men. And I've been concerned a little bit because not all feminists are as conscious as we would like. Not all of the people on the other side are as conscious as we would like. And so I believe that you know, these young men that are coming up in their, you know, teenagers and in their 20s, they're not going to school. They're not setting goals like they once did. You know, law schools and my daughter just graduated from law schools and medical schools, young men are not entering. And so I think it's important that we make the distinction that patriarchy is what, that system is what has made young men fodder for war. It's what, you know, you mentioned sex trafficking. Half of those sex trafficked are men, are boys. We don't realize that. It's 48%. And we don't have the resources for those young men. We have tons of resources for the women, for the young girls that escape or that are brought out. We don't have the same resources for men. So I just wanted to, as a champion of young men, yes, I wanted to point that out. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's where I wrote my book on the sacred masculine a few years ago, called Hidden Spirituality of Men, 10 Metaphors to Awaken the Sacred Masculine, 10 Archetypes. And I alluded to it briefly here 10 minutes ago when I said we have to clean up the masculine. We need a healthy masculine. But
Sure.
where you have people like, well, if I can mention the name, Donald Trump,
Mm-hmm.
and others represented, this is what it means to succeed for a male and so forth, you're in a very perverted situation. And so we have to dig deeper, and we have to help our young people, and certainly our boys,
Mm-hmm.
to develop their authentic powers. And that's why these archetypes like Father Sky and the Green Man and the Blue Man and the Hunter-Gatherer and the Spiritual Warrior, all these are very important archetypes by which we should be raising our children. But we're not. The overall culture is, as you say, talk about war, but also about winning, and sports where you win or lose. Although sports are not at all a bad thing. In fact, I think sports are a way of dealing with the reptilian brain without killing each other.
Mm.
It's really very brilliant. I think that humans develop, say, a basketball court. So there's a parameter, and there's a time limit, and there's umpires and rules. But within that, all those limits, then the young men are called out to be excellent, play as hard as they can. And so you take out, the reptilian brain. What we're doing as humans is we're playing with the reptilian brain instead of letting it run us.
Mm.
And of course, meditation is another way to calm the reptilian brain, because reptiles like solitude. They don't like bonding very much. So they lie alone in the sun. And so there's what we do. When we meditate, we are entering that arena, that field of solitude. And so we're taming the reptilian brain. Nice crocodile, nice crocodile. And so people who meditate, male or female, are dealing in a very important way with, in fact, I don't think we can survive as a species either without meditation of some kind, because we have to calm the reptilian brain. It is out of control, and it is raping the earth, and it therefore is committing suicide, fatalistic self-hatred. So I couldn't agree more. We need the healthy feminine, and we have to understand what patriarchy is, which is what you were talking about. A year ago, I was at a conference with Elia Ilio, the scientist theologian, and she's into Teilhard. She's not very heavy, but primarily she's a scientist. Then she discovered Teilhard. Now she's science and theology. But she talked a lot about patriarchy, and we were dialoguing for like 2 days. Well, when the conference was over and the auditorium was empty, a man came up to, he's in his young 40s, and he was furious. He said, all that lady talked about was patriarchy, and I really feel offended. He said, I'm a faithful husband. I have 3 children. I earn a good living for my family. I work hard, and I'm just so angry at that woman. I mean, he was like screaming. I had to calm him down first because his reptilian brain was triggering. And I said, look, patriarchy is not about being a man. It's a philosophy. It's a way you think of the world. And that's what she was criticizing. So as a man or a woman, we have to choose whether we believe in these patriarchal principles of dualism and domination and power over and the rest, or whether we want to choose another path. And that's really what she's talking about. Well, the air kind of went out of me. The sizzle kind of went out of him. But it really drove something. And this is in the South. It was in Florida. Mm-hmm. So, I think there's a consciousness there that's particularly vulnerable, overly sensitive to criticism of patriarchy or the military. Mm-hmm. But I realized something from it, that this word patriarchy has to be defined for people, just like you said. We can't just throw it around, because many men, many people, especially men, presume it's about them. And it doesn't have to be, unless we choose to commit ourselves to that particular way of living in the world. Mm-hmm. And that's what it's about. So I couldn't agree more that we have to raise consciousness about what patriarchy is and what it isn't, what it's saying, what it isn't saying.
So thank you for going into that space with me. I thought that was an important thing to over clarify. We may have over clarified it, but it is an important thing. So in chapter 7, you say that evil is not an abstraction in our time. It unveils its face in a stark way. How does, you've mentioned a couple things, but how does evil unveil itself in current times? What's the first thing that comes to you?
Well, of course, racism. So
Mm,
this event in Minneapolis, which is in fact paralleled by many other events, but that particular one that went live on TV and the rest, a policeman kneeling on an alive Black man who died in the process, asking for help. I mean, and it was a very moving thing that people poured into the streets of all races and all ages. So that's Black Lives Matter movement is part of that. So obviously slavery and the history of slavery that we've been sitting on. I mean,
mm,
part of white privilege has been to not really, uh, what should I say, go deeply into that 400-year history of taking slaves, taking human beings from Africa, bringing them here, and everything that's happened since. Now, I also have to mention that what's called the discovery doctrine. In the 15th century, late 15th century, just before Europeans set out for the New Worlds and for the African trade and slavery, the Pope, two popes, put out these three bulls, papal bulls, called the discovery doctrine, which in essence said, Christian kings and queens, the empires of Portugal and Spain specifically, have the right to go to Africa or any other country
mm-hmm.
and do whatever they want to the natives there because they're not Christian. I mean, it was just a horrible document. And I think Pope Francis, who has something of a conscience, ought to burn those documents in St. Peter's Square with television on it. Now, they don't have to burn the exact ones. The exact ones can be under glass in the museum.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it belongs. But facsimiles thereof to make the point that, because these documents gave, if you will, legal jurisprudence permission for slavery. And they are embedded in American jurisprudence. The Supreme Court in the early 19th century took those documents and said, yes, this justifies the way we're treating the native people in this land still in the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's the Native American genocide. That's a big part of what we're dealing with, and the trauma of our time. And yet, as we are learning, the Native people have so much to teach us about relating to Mother Earth and caring and building a society where respect for Mother Earth is essential. Mm-hmm. And of course, the women's movement, the Me Too movement, and other forms of feminism are also about this. So too is a men's movement, but the men's movement has been lax. And that's one reason I wrote my book a few years ago on the sacred masks, and that men have to get moving. The women are way ahead of us in terms of reflecting on our own privilege and our own suffering, because as a African-American young man told me recently, he said, slavery is not just our trauma, it's white trauma too. We're all in this together. And it's true of Native American trauma as well, that the dominator and the dominated are in a relationship. And we're feeding one another with the traumas that we've inherited, whether our relatives were slave owners or not, and whether they were slaves or not. Again, it's about the whole, and we're all suffering from this. So, I think that, and of course, the suffering of Mother Earth is just so clear, and she's trying to wake us up. I mean, 2 summers ago, we had a whole continent on fire, Australia. That wasn't enough. So then we need coronavirus to wake us up. Is this going to be enough? What is it going to take to wake our species up? Here in California, where I live, Northern California, of course, we have these terrible wildfires now. But before that, we had 7 years of drought. And of course, in the South, they have these incredible hurricanes increasing in number and velocity, and the floods that follow and all the rest. I mean, it's just one trauma after another. And we're not even there yet. I mean, as the seas rise more, already people are abandoning islands in the Pacific Islands because the salt water has gotten into their fresh water, so humans can't live there anymore. It's happening in Miami too. But you have a governor there who's in denial about climate change and saying that government workers cannot use the word climate change in their emails to other government workers. Well, our president has said the same thing about the national bureaucracy. So, you know, it's really amazing. You have denial on the one hand, and then you have the facts on the other. And then how do you get moving? And of course, there are these efforts. There's the Extinction Rebellion movement. There's the Paris Peace Treaty, etc. And more science is working on solutions, especially around, of course, alternative energy and building giant batteries that can really store this energy. One scientific conference I was at, they said that if you could create double the storage battery capacity, all the southern continents and countries could leap over the Industrial Revolution and move into a solar place. And that, of course, have tremendous impact on climate change. And if we can change our diets, because the consuming of meat, excessively at least, has so much to do with the disappearance of forests, which has to do with the increase of carbon dioxide. So there are so many areas that we could be working on, and people are working on, but you would think that this crisis could bring our species together. But instead, as you pointed out, we're at this time of such division, because there are politicians who are demagogues and taking advantage of it.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you've said so many things, and this is, I want to go into a direction that I started to say it's unrelated, but is anything really unrelated? I wondered if you could address this, what many call low road capitalism, that this country is based on, built on the backs of enslaved people. One of the Hermetic axioms is nothing can rise above its source, the principle of cause and effect. Can we ever rise above or take this to a higher level, this form of, I guess, the economy that we have? Can we ever rise above what it was built on?
Well, I believe we have to reinvent all the layers of our culture, beginning with education, because we pass our bankers and our economists and our business people through education, and our politicians and our judges and our lawmakers, and so much else. So what if education is messed up? I alluded to it earlier. What if education is so patriarchal, which it is, that it doesn't even talk about wisdom? It doesn't know how to teach wisdom. It only knows how to teach knowledge. And knowledge by itself is raw power. Like Thomas Berry says, most of the destruction of the planet is happening at the hands of people with PhDs. So we have to reinvent education. And that's been a big part of my life's work. I've been trying to deconstruct and reconstruct religion, but also education. And I know how to teach a wisdom school. I know how to do it. You bring art as meditation in there. That's what does it. That trains the right brain. And Einstein said this. He said that values come from the intuition, not from rationality. He says, do not overvalue the intellect. You know, that doesn't give you values, it gives you methods. So we need to balance, he said, the intuitive, and that's why I insist on art as meditation in its many expressions, and the rational. And that's exactly what I did for over 40 years in master's and doctorate programs, but also with inner city teenagers who are dropping out of school. And always there's been this amazing success. So it has to begin with education. But we need a new economics that brings in the feminine values. And that would include compassion and justice, such as Julian talks about at length, of course, about the mother principle and compassion. But that too is based can be based on today's physics, which is all about interdependence. Now, the mystics knew about interdependence long before postmodern physics, but postmodern physics is now on board, that interdependence is what makes things happen in the universe. So this should be the law of our economics and politics and all the rest. But it isn't. It's about win-lose, Wall Street versus Main Street, and Wall Street always wins. And Wall Street hires the lawyers, the judges, and the politicians to make sure it's always on top. So that whole system has to be deconstructed and reconstructed. We need an economics that works for everyone. And that means not just all the two-legged ones, but all the beings on the planet. And is that possible? It is possible. Humans are capable of that. But are we up to it? That's the test. And we only have 10, 9, 8 years left, according to scientists, regarding the fate of the planet and the global warming. So this is, really coming down to a crunch time. And of course, the young are more and more aware of this than the old because they have less investment in the old structures. And that's why they're at home with the word socialism. But I think we can use a different word. But the kind of capitalism we have is clearly part of the problem, not the solution.
Matthew, I could listen to you, for a week without stopping, I think. But we're coming close to time now. I wanted to ask you about something. You've written about the shadow side of ritual, where it's not used to awaken consciousness to invite joy or healing, but it's used to enforce ideas of hatred or racism, and basically bringing people together in community based on hate. Can you explain a bit about that?
Sure. I wrote a major book on evil several years ago, but it came out just a year ago with a new edition with a foreword by his name, the fellow from India, the doctor from India, who lives in California.
Deepak?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
And in his foreword, he says, in the second paragraph of his essay, he says, evil will be the number one issue in the 21st, spiritual issue in the 21st century. And so in my book on evil, I have actually an appendix, a chapter on Hitler as a religious figure. And in there, I go into the point that he made these amazing rituals, he and his gang, the Nazis. We've seen them, some of them on film, 140,000 people in a stadium in Nuremberg. And they imitated cathedrals. They had lights that went straight up and everything. So, and the people who put it together actually studied ritual rule books, if you will, from the Catholic Church, from the Jesuit order and so forth. So it was ritual, but it was ritual to serve what I would call demonic purposes, evil purposes. And I have to say that these rallies that some politicians, where some politicians in our country at this time love to feed their egos, they're scary because they're capable of whipping up that same kind of frenzy among the people. And we know from what happened in Germany, what happens. People lose their sense of conscience, their individuality and capacity to make their own decisions, and get whipped up by the frenzy of hatred. Now, one politician is not doing this today. It has been a movement for decades. We've had hate radio. I had a friend who drove across America, and he said there are all kinds of pockets in America where you can't get NPR, but you can always get Rush Limbaugh. Always, every pocket in America, there's Rush Limbaugh preaching hate. And of course, he has many imitators today. So we have hate radio, we have hate television. I don't have to name Fox News by name, and now there are others that are even more full of hate than Fox News that are growing up and being seeded by some people in the White House. And then, of course, you have hate social media, which is a new phenomenon, of course, because you don't know how to control that. But the point is that this hatred is in the air, and it's definitely permeated our politics, and the media, So we have to wake up to this, and it creates its own rituals, its own gatherings, its own ecclesia or assemblies. And they're scary. I mean, even in the 2016 election, there were reporters at these rallies, or presidential rallies, or potential presidential rallies, nominees, candidates, who literally physically attacked the media there and chased them out of the room and so forth. So this cannot be underestimated, because we have a tape of all this. It's the 1930s in Germany, and we know how that ended. And it didn't, and it wasn't a majority or 50% either. It doesn't take that to destroy what are really very vulnerable institutions in democracy, which we're learning. We've been learning this the last years, for sure, seeing it. I hope we're learning. But yeah, so the desire to come together is very human. We love to come together for sports rituals and for theater rituals and for religious rituals. And the truth is that a lot of ideology today is ritualistic, and it sees itself as religion. That is to say, the ultimate values. To me, these are episodes of idolatry, because they do not match the teachings of the great spiritual teachers about justice and about compassion and about forgiveness. Instead, they are about hate. They're rituals of hate and power, and but they take on the material elements of ritual: chanting, lights, flags, altars, preachers. The whole bit is there. And under Hitler, it was very developed, and consciously so. And sad to say, it worked. Sure. I mean, it was a big part of their success.
Well, thank you for going into that. This is really about projecting personal power outside of yourself. And I think anytime we do that, we don't have footing. What would you say about, we all like to give away our power. That's human nature. We put it on other people when we blame. We put it on other people to save us. We put it out there in the future, waiting for something to happen that may never happen. What would you say about that, as far as the opposite of what you've just talked about, putting our hope outside of ourselves?
Yes, but I think the opposite of that projection, as you rightly call it, is feeding and practicing our own creativity. And this is, again, where Julian comes in. I mean, it's really significant, I think, that she spent her whole life writing one book. She ended up writing 3 books, but the same book. She just kept developing it. And that was her life's work after the age of 30. But so she believed in art as meditation. And I think we all are called to put the key is work. She has this beautiful teaching. I just love it, if I can find the exact sentence, where she talks about charged up. I just love that word. I remember she'd never heard of electricity, but she uses the term charged up by awe and wonder. We do the work that we're called to do in the world. Here it is: charged with the quality of reverence and loving awe, we turn ourselves with all our might toward the actions to which we are guided. I just love that. She's calling us to action, but the action should come from non-action, that is, from awe and reverence. And I love that phrase, reverence and loving awe. In other words, from the via positiva. This is what feeds our creativity and our efforts to make a difference in the world. It is our work. It's what you're doing here with a podcast, and what I do with my writing and so forth. That we're all called. We do it as parents and grandparents, as teachers. I mean, when you think about, all our professions are meant to be places of service, with this mother energy of caring that Julian is all about. This is what economics and business could be, and politics and media and schooling, education and religion, all that. could be what Julian's dreaming about, if you will, or what she's setting forward. And that would be bringing in the divine feminine with the sacred masculine. So our work is key. And I think she really recognized that, even though she was living as an anchoress after her visions. And an anchoress, lived in they lived in what we're calling solitude today. And the way we're all called to live indoors these days. I mean, she was committed for life, literally walled in for life. And it was a ritual in the Catholic Church at that time, the Middle Ages. It began in the 4th century in Palestine. But she had one small window into the church where she participated in the services, but then a regular window to the outside world where she counseled a lot of people. That was her work, if you will, with spiritual direction. She met a lot of people that way. She's very earthy and down to earth and grounded. And so she found a way to serve as well, even locked into a circumstance like that.
So that is our hope. Our work is our hope.
Our work is our hope. That's where we should be putting our values. And that's what's so sad when you see people, public people especially, people in public service, selling their souls to not to make the country better or the world better, but to spread fear and hate and division and greed. These are the shadow elements. These are the vices that humans are susceptible to. We have to guard ourselves with that. In my book on evil, I take the 7 chakras of the East and compare them to the 7 capital sins of the West, because a chakra, when healthy, tells us our healthy powers, what we can do with them. But when unhealthy, I found that they correspond to the 7 capital sins of the West, such as avarice and greed and envy and violence and so forth. And hatred. So all of us, and of course, all human societies deal with this. All human religions have tried to deal with it, but all of us have to take stock of how healthy our powers are, our chakras, and are they serving bigger and better purposes? Because we all make an imprint in our life on this earth. And is it going to be for furthering of creativity and compassion and dignity, or is it going to be about destruction?
Wow. Great way to kind of summarize everything. That work is ongoing. A quote from Julian in your book, and I also want to mention again, Julian of Norwich, Wisdom in a Time of Pandemic and Beyond, that is available online. And also MatthewFox.org. Please, everyone, visit the website. There's lots of information there. But a quote from Julian in your book was, "In spite of all of our feelings of sorrow or well-being, God wants us to understand and know by faith that we are more truly in heaven than on earth." Wow. What a different world it is when we realize that.
That's true. And, Eckhart, who came right before her, he said that we must become a heaven on earth so that God will find a home here. So he was saying the same thing. And that was in his commentary on the Our Father, which begins, "Our Father who art in heaven," and is about bringing earth and heaven together. And I think this is part of the archetype of Father Sky too. That I think part of the modern era is that men were, the science, which was mistaken, but it developed a cosmology of mechanism. The universe was a machine. Well, that destroyed the whole idea of Father Sky as being a source of energy and of investment, if you will, for male energy and passion. And so men hunkered down in the modern era, and then they were set up to join the army and kill people. And so I think this movement from the mechanistic and sky and the punitive Father God to Father Sky and the sacredness
Mm.
of Mother Earth and Sky and the marriage of the two. And that's what the Divine Feminine and the Sacred Masculine marriage is really about today. So I think this could really rescue us from this circumstance that is so debilitating to all of us, women and men.
May it be so.
Maybe so.
Thank you for your extensive body of work in the world, your sacred work that continues on. You just had a major milestone birthday. I don't know if you share your age willingly, but no one would ever guess.
Well, sure. In fact, I wrote an essay on my daily meditations, which are free and people can go there and see them. 2 days ago, I wrote one on being 80, turning 80. Wow. And I have some remnants of my little party here behind me here, a balloon or flowers or something. But I turned 80, and what can I say? Looking forward to what's next.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are blessed by your 8 decades, and hope it continues on for many more.
Thank you. And by the way, my birthday is on the winter solstice.
Perfect. That's beautiful. Well, happy belated birthday. And to all of you who have joined us for this conversation, thank you. I would love it if you would click subscribe below, and you'll receive notifications of more conversations like this. I hope you'll come back again, Matthew. I think we have more to dive into.
Well, thank you, Raven. I enjoyed our conversation very much. I'm glad you have a program like this.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, everybody, visit MatthewFox.org, and I'll see you next time.